Hey everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality coming back with you today with an article from Commentary Magazine by Seth Mandel, and this is dated February 21st. I know it's a long time ago, but I just found this the other day because it's kind of relevant to what's going on. I thought I might have done a video on this. I know I've done other videos by Mr. Mandel from Commentary before, but I looked and I didn't see one about this particular thing when it happened. Or this particular article. So we're just going to go ahead and do it now. So it says 16 months of lies about everything. It says to put a fine point on it, Hamas lies about everything, and therefore Hamas has lied about everything. Hamas propaganda has shaped the world's understanding of this conflict, and every syllable of it has been false. And that's what you need to understand, is that you're dealing with an entire society, an entire group that's basically like the equivalent of a compulsive liar, and yet people believe them about stuff, even though, again, as the article said, they lie about everything. One is tempted to interject here that an intellectually honest person would have already come to this conclusion, and therefore perhaps there are precious few minds left to be changed, but integrity compels us to say what is true anyway. Hamas's lies about the Bibas family were shocking even by Hamas standards. Shiri and her two sons, Ariel and Kafir, were taken from their homes on October 7, 2023, when Ariel was 4 and Kafir was less than a year old. Throughout the war, Hamas claimed they were killed in an Israeli airstrike. Yarden, Shiri's husband and the kid's father, was also taken hostage but held separately from his family. Hamas taunted him repeatedly, once even on camera for a propaganda video about his family's fate, and Yarden was released this month being February, of course, because that's when the article was written. It says, yesterday, Hamas returned the bodies of Ariel and Kafir and a third hostage, Oded Lifshitz, as well as a body they claimed was Shiri, but turned out to have been a random unidentified Palestinian woman. So that wasn't the only surprise revealed during Israel's forensic examination of the bodies. The boys were not killed in an Israeli airstrike. They were murdered by their Palestinian captors, who strangled the children with their bare hands and then mutilated their bodies in order to try and obfuscate their cause of death. So the people standing up for the Palestinians right now, like that's what you're cheering for, okay? And anybody that knows how this stuff goes knows that, again, whatever Hamas says is probably a lie. So you can say if they were killed in an Israeli airstrike, but I go, no, they probably weren't. And of course, that's true. It says the claim that the Bibases were killed in an IDF airstrike was believable enough, and therefore was widely believed. Even if that had been true, it wouldn't have mitigated Hamas's responsibility one iota. But since much of the world, from media to governments to activist organizations, was looking for any excuse to absolve Hamas and the Palestinians and to cast Israel's counteroffensive as overly aggressive and counterproductive to boot, its underlying assumptions were accepted and repeated and shaped debate over the war even within Israel itself. And since Israel and the U.S. are democracies, public debate shapes war policy and outcomes as well. In this way, Hamas has stage managed the war to an unprecedented degree. It is not as though we hadn't caught Hamas in lies throughout the war, of course. After all, there are two kinds of Hamas statements: lies that have been exposed and lies that have yet to be exposed. Yeah, and again, even just during the course of the war, there's how many times have they lied about stuff that's been proven wrong, and yet people just, again, they still believe them uncritically. It says there are the big lies worth briefly recounting, but which are by no means all of them. Hamas managed to get pretty much every major newspaper and network to double the actual numbers of civilian casualties, as there were about 25,000 all considered, and inflated the overall casualty figures. Not only was there no genocide in Gaza, there wasn't even disproportionate collateral damage. Yeah, and that's their biggest lie, is that there's a genocide. There's not, and there never was. And this has been proven countless times, and I have numerous videos on that, so go check those out. As Hamas and its NGO mouthpieces got the world to repeat the threat of looming famine, and the International Criminal Court put out a warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu's arrest on conclusively debunked charges of international starvation. And go ahead and click on that link to see exactly what he's talking about. It says it turned out that Hamas, however, was intentionally starving Israeli hostages. Yes, they were. This early on, Hamas blamed Israel for an explosion at a hospital in Gaza and claimed hundreds were killed. By the time it became clear that a Palestinian rocket was to blame, mob protests against Israel and the U.S. broke out across the world, and President Biden's meetings with Arab leaders were canceled. Hamas has also lied about hostages, announcing the deaths of captives who are still alive. In one case, the terror group forced a female captive to participate in the staging of her own death. So those big lies spawned 1,000 little lies. But the point is that reporting on the conflict, which led to weapons embargoes by allies against Israel, which was based on lies every step of the way. If you got your news from the New York Times or the Washington Post or the BBC or any number of others, you followed an entirely different war one that didn't happen. That's a very good way of putting that. That's probably like the sentence of the year as far as I'm concerned in regards to this conflict. Says the only way to have your outlet publish a factual accounting of the conflict is by assuming every statement by Hamas is a lie until definitively proved otherwise. If not, you'll end up with the credibility of Hamas. Yeah, and again, I'm going to say this right here. If you got your news from the New York Times or the Washington Post or the BBC or any number of others, you followed an entirely different war, one that didn't happen. That is so correct. I can't even say how correct it is. But yeah, so why do you believe Hamas? Why do you believe like a compulsively lying organization? Okay, I just don't understand. But let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.